No one in the restaurant that night knew who he was. Not the waitress juggling trays with the weariness of a double shift, not the teenagers at the counter laughing too loudly over milkshakes, not even the owner who strutted from table to table like a mayor in his own kingdom. To them, he was just another quiet man in a worn jacket, sitting alone at the back booth near the window, his plate half finished, his glass of water untouched. It was late evening in a small American town, the kind of place where Friday nights felt predictable. Families crowded booths, old couples nursed coffee, and kids darted between tables. The smell of fried food clung to the air, mingling with the faint tang of cleaning detergent and the sweetness of pie under glass at the counter. Outside, the parking lot was lit by a flickering neon sign, its red glow leaking through the front windows in uneven pulses. At first, the tension was invisible. The man in the corner, Chuck Norris, though nobody realized, ate slowly, quietly. His posture was relaxed but upright, his presence easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. There was nothing of Hollywood glamour in him, no air of celebrity. He seemed smaller here, a man blending into the ordinary rhythm of town life. But the owner noticed him. He was a tall, broad man in his 40s, hair slicked back, shirt tucked too tightly into his belt. He thrived on attention, thrived on laughter that bent in his direction. Every night, he prowled the dining room like a performer on stage, cracking jokes, puffing his chest, reminding everyone who owned the place they sat in. That night, he decided his show needed a target. He stopped near the corner booth, squinting at the quiet figure. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, well, don't we have ourselves a tough guy? You know, you kinda look like Chuck Norris. Shame legends only live in the movies, huh?" The comment drew chuckles from a few tables. A group of college kids at the counter laughed too quickly, eager to side with the man who controlled the room. The waitress forced a polite smile, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the booth. Chuck didn't react. He looked at the man, calm, his fork resting lightly against his plate. His silence was not submissive. It was watchful. But to the crowd, it read as indifference, maybe weakness. The owner smirked, encouraged by the response. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe those karate kicks don't work without a stunt double around." More laughter. Phones appeared. One of the teenagers at the counter whispered, "Record this. It's hilarious," while sliding a screen into position. The glow of the camera lens hovered like an accusation. Chuck's eyes moved briefly toward the glass, then back to the man standing over him. He said nothing. He didn't even frown. His silence stretched so long that it pressed into the air like weight, until even the people laughing began to feel it. The contrast sharpened, the owner's booming voice against the quiet figure who refused to bite. The imbalance unsettled the room, though few admitted it. Some smirked awkwardly. Others avoided looking at the corner booth altogether. But the owner couldn't stop. He thrived on escalation, on proving himself bigger than anyone else in the room. He leaned in, planting his hand on the edge of the table. "Come on, cowboy. Give us a show. Or is the big bad legend just another old man eating meatloaf in the corner?" The words cut sharper than intended. A hush fell for just a second, a subtle recoil from the crowd. The insult had a sting, a cruelty too blatant to hide behind humor. The waitress froze mid-step, her tray wobbling slightly. At another booth, an older couple shifted uncomfortably. Chuck exhaled once through his nose, slow. He didn't move, didn't answer. His silence was louder than the insult itself, and it hung in the room like a challenge no one could name. The owner straightened, brushing invisible dust from his shirt, and laughed, a sound too harsh to be real. He looked around for approval, And the laughter he got back was thinner this time, nervous at the edges. A man near the door whispered to his wife, who hushed him quickly. No one yet knew what line had been crossed, but everyone in the restaurant felt it. The stillness, the imbalance, the sense that they were witnessing something more than a joke gone too far. And in that silence, with the crowd caught between amusement and unease, the tension in the small-town restaurant thickened, waiting for the next word, the next move, the next spark. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, Bello. The owner wasn't finished. He thrived on the hum of attention, on the way people looked at him when he cracked a line loud enough for the whole room. He turned toward the counter where the teenagers sat, with their phones angled just right, and he threw his next line for them as if pitching a ball. You know what the thing about legends is? His voice carried, bouncing against the tiled walls. They fit on posters. They look good in slow motion. But real life? He tapped his chest with a thick finger. Real life is busted knees, mortgages, grease traps in the back kitchen. Real life is telling old men their time's up. It got him a few laughs, though they came too quickly, like people laughing at a boss they didn't want to cross. A mother with 2 kids at her booth pressed her lips together, the corners tightening, but she didn't say anything. The little girl in the soccer jersey asked, "Mom, what's funny?" And the mom shook her head, without meeting her daughter's eyes. Chuck lifted his glass and drank. Water traced a slow ring onto the formica. He set it down softly. No sound but that faint scrape of glass. His eyes never rose. The owner leaned in further. "Hey, cowboy," he said, louder, angling his grin for the crowd. "What are you now, 70? You still got those karate kicks in you? Or do they swap you a new hip every couple of years?" Somebody snorted. Too sharp. The waitress paused near the counter, tray heavy with plates, her jaw tightening until the muscles showed under her skin. The cook peeked out from the pass-through window, arms crossed, then slid back into the kitchen. Chuck still didn't answer. The silence worked against the owner. It made him shout even more. He raised his voice toward the kitchen again. "Hey, Tommy? You hear this? We've got ourselves a Hollywood hero. Better send him a bowl of soup before bedtime, huh?" The kids with phones laughed, though their screens shook in their hands. An older man in a ball cap glanced down, rubbed his forehead, then pretended to study the condiments on his table. A couple near the window exchanged a look, both of them shifting as though they wanted to get up, then settling back down. Near the register, a busboy had stopped moving. He was maybe 19, sleeves rolled twice, hands gripping a stack of sticky menus. He stared at the owner, then at the man in the booth. His jaw moved like he was chewing words before speaking them. He hesitated once, twice, then took a step forward. "Sir," the boy said, voice thin but clear, "maybe leave him alone. He's just eating." The restaurant froze. The words landed louder than a shout. The owner's grin faltered, then snapped back wider, plastic. He turned, his voice dripping mock sweetness. "Ethan, right? Didn't we talk about staying in your lane?" The boy swallowed, adjusted his grip on the menus. "Yeah, but he's a customer." "Everyone's a customer," the owner said, spinning the line for the crowd. "But not everyone's entertainment." He jerked his chin toward the phones. "You see this? They love it. The crowd didn't love it. Not anymore." Their laughter had thinned, and most weren't even looking at their food. They were watching the boy and the man at the booth, and above all, they were watching themselves. Ethan's cheeks flushed, but his voice steadied. "It's not funny." The owner's tone hardened, dropping the show for a second. "You know what else isn't funny?" He gestured toward the ceiling. Payroll. You like Saturday nights? Or do you want to get stuck bussing lunch shifts? Because Saturday nights are a privilege. The restaurant heard every word. A man coughed into his fist. The waitress lowered her tray behind the counter and didn't touch it again. Ethan blinked fast, jaw trembling. Then something in him snapped into place. "I'll take lunch," he said quietly. It was small, but it was enough to make the air shift. The cook reappeared in the kitchen window, slower this time. A few customers sat straighter, their eyes sharpening. The owner sneered, then smoothed it into another grin. "That's the spirit. Learn your place. Maybe one day you'll own a place like this." He pivoted back to the corner booth, resting his hand on the table like he owned even that. "Now," he said, too loud, "where were we? Ah, yes. The myth, the legend, just another man with a fork." Chuck set his fork down gently. The sound was a small metallic tap, but it sliced the room in half. He looked at the owner, just once, his gaze level, not angry, but sharp enough that the man's grin wavered. Then he looked down again, his palms resting flat on the table. The owner thought it was weakness. He mistook stillness for surrender. "Tell you what," he said, "if you can kick that ketchup bottle off the shelf like you do in the movies, dinner's free." He chuckled. "Or you can just pay and move along. We don't need fantasies here." A murmur moved through the booths, uneasy, restless. People glanced at each other, shame prickling. A man whispered, "That's too much," and his wife hushed him. Another leaned close to his phone screen, comparing a photo of Chuck Norris to the figure in the booth. The waitress, unable to stand it, muttered to herself, "Whether it's him or not, it's enough." But the owner wasn't listening. He reached for the plate, sliding it an inch toward himself. The fork wobbled, steadied. The room compressed. The little girl in the soccer jersey froze with her straw in her mouth. The busboy clenched the back of a chair, his knuckles whitening. The teenagers' phones shook in their hands. Nobody laughed. Outside, the neon sign flickered, humming faintly against the glass. A semi-truck roared past on the highway, its vibration buzzing in the window frame. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer beeped, then cut off abruptly. Chuck exhaled, slow, deliberate. The sound wasn't loud, but it carved through the silence like a blade. The owner's grin widened. "That's right," he said softly, triumphantly. "Time to cash out, partner." The bell above the door trembled faintly with the draft. It gave a soft, metallic ring, though no one had touched it. The building itself seemed to breathe, waiting for what was about to step inside. The owner gripped the plate like proof of his authority. His voice had lost the joking tone. Now it was sharp. "We're done here. Pay at the counter and leave. This isn't story hour." The restaurant went still. People stared at their food, uncomfortable. The teenagers lowered their phones slightly but kept recording. The waitress leaned on the counter, her jaw tight. Chuck didn't move. He lifted his eyes once, calmly measuring the room, then returned to the glass of water in front of him. The owner mistook the silence for surrender. He yanked the plate off the table. "See? No fight left. Legends fade just like everyone else." From the corner, a man in a ball cap stood. "That's enough," he said, shaky but audible. For a moment, it felt like the room might shift, but the owner snapped back instantly. "Sit down, or you'll be out next." The man sat. Ethan, the busboy, stepped forward. "He paid," he said. "Let him be." "Last warning," the owner shot back. The threat wasn't just for Ethan. It was for everyone. That's when the whispers began. A woman leaned across to her husband. "You know who that is?" At another table, A teenager pulled up a photo, holding it next to the quiet man in the booth. His voice cracked. "It's him! It's Chuck Norris." The rumor spread fast. Heads turned. Some people froze, others looked down, ashamed of having laughed. The owner ignored it. He slammed the plate onto another table. "Door's right there," he said. And Chuck finally stood. He rose slowly, slipping into his jacket. No aggression, no words, just presence, enough that the owner instinctively stepped back before forcing himself forward again. "See?" the owner barked to the room. "That's real life. No stunt doubles. Just another man leaving when he's told." But his laugh rang hollow. The waitress spoke, voice firm but low. "He didn't ask you for anything. He just wanted to eat." The truth landed like a weight. And then came the sound. At first it was faint, a low vibration under the floor. Then louder, layered, unmistakable. Motorcycle engines. Heavy, rolling, filling the night outside. Heads turned toward the windows. Phones rose again, no longer playful, but nervous. Bright headlights swept across the glass, one after another. Chrome glinted under the parking lot lamps. Leather vests gleamed dark. Patches caught the light. Hell's Angels. Someone whispered it, and the word spread fast. Hell's Angels. Engines cut. Boots hit asphalt, heavy and deliberate. Helmets came off, laughter low and rough. The riders moved with the confidence of men who didn't need permission. One of them, taller than the rest, turned toward the glass. His jaw caught the light, sharp, unmistakable. He said something the crowd couldn't hear, and the others shifted in unison, an unspoken signal. The owner's face twitched, though he forced a smirk. "Relax," he told the room, but his voice was thinner now. Chuck rolled his shoulders under his jacket. A small gesture, but it carried weight. Ethan noticed and whispered, "You know them?" Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to. The bell over the door rang. Cold air poured in, edged with gasoline and road dust. Boots crossed the threshold. The conversations died instantly. The tall man scanned the room, then found the booth where Chuck stood. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Evening," he said, voice graveled by years on the road. Behind him, the angels fanned into the doorway, filling the space with their presence. And then the tall man shifted aside, leaving room for someone else to follow. Cold night air pushed through the doorway, carrying the smell of gasoline, leather, and rain that hadn't fallen. Heavy boots hit the floor one by one, each step sending a dull vibration through the wood. The jackets told the story before anyone spoke. Black leather, winged skull patches in red and white. Hell's Angels. The engines outside still idled for a few seconds, low thunder pressing against the glass, then died one after another until silence grew heavier than the sound. The room froze. Forks stayed in midair. Phones, half raised, trembled, but didn't lower. The waitress placed her tray on the counter with exaggerated care, as though any noise might trigger something. The little girl in the soccer jersey buried her face against her mother's arm. The owner stood rigid near the door, still clutching a plate he no longer seemed to know how to hold. He forced a grin, but his eyes betrayed him. The swagger that had carried him through the night was slipping. The bikers didn't need to snarl or raise their voices. Their presence was enough. The tall man in front scanned the room slowly, eyes moving like he was taking stock of exits, faces, and threats. His gaze stopped at the booth where Chuck stood, already in his jacket. "Evening," the tall man said, voice deep, steady. Nobody answered. The sound seemed to linger longer than it should have, as though the air refused to swallow it. The owner tried to laugh. "You boys lost," he said, his tone brittle. "Kitchen's closed." A few of the riders smirked, but the tall man didn't. He shifted so the patch on his back caught the flickering neon, the skull and wings glowing against the glass. Then another man stepped forward, a gray-bearded rider, older, his jacket creased with years of weather. He didn't posture, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the owner the way a mechanic looks at a part that's about to fail. "You don't know who you're talking to," he said, each word quiet but sharp. He nodded toward Chuck. "Chuck's a friend." The sentence rippled through the room. People who had laughed earlier now stared at their hands. The teenagers with phones shifted uncomfortably, screens still glowing, but suddenly less sure. A man at a booth muttered, "I told you," and his wife hushed him. The truth had settled. The rumor was over. The owner's mask cracked. His eyes flicked toward Chuck, then back. He tried to reclaim the room. "Friend?" "Sure. He's just an actor," he said, forcing a chuckle that broke mid-word. "Folks, relax." But the crowd didn't relax. They leaned away from him. They leaned toward Chuck, toward the bikers, toward the gravity of the moment. The gray-bearded rider didn't advance, but the space between him and the owner shrank anyway. "You ever hear him ask for anything?" he asked. The question was soft, but it stripped the room bare. The owner licked his lips. "I run a business. House rules." No one looked at the rules. All eyes were on the quiet figure by the booth, Chuck, who hadn't spoken, hadn't threatened, hadn't moved closer. His stillness carried more weight than the owner's shouts had all evening. The tall rider looked at Chuck once, then back at the owner. "Real life," he said, "is how you treat a man when nobody's keeping score." The words bent the room. People shifted in their seats, the crowd as a whole tipping away from the owner. Phones lowered. The waitress, braver now, said aloud, "He never asked you for anything. He just wanted to eat." The owner didn't answer. His plate clattered softly onto a nearby table as his grip failed. Sweat shone at his temples. The bikers spread slightly, not to threaten, but to claim space. Their silence was louder than any shout. Ethan, the busboy, found his voice again. "He's okay," he said, almost to himself. His eyes flicked toward Chuck, then toward the riders. His hands no longer shook. The gray-bearded biker turned his head toward Ethan, then back to the owner. "So, any problem now?" His tone was level, but the question was final. The owner's mouth opened, then closed. "No problem," he said, barely audible. The crowd let out a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Some turned their eyes toward Chuck, others toward the bikers. Everyone knew the balance had shifted. Chuck touched the back of his chair lightly with 2 fingers, as if grounding himself. He still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. And then, from the doorway, a younger rider with a scar across his jaw cleared his throat. His eyes locked on Chuck, and for the first time that night, warmth entered the room. He looked like a man carrying a story that was about to be told, a truth heavier than fists. He stepped forward. "I should tell you something," he said, his voice steady, carrying to every corner of the restaurant. The room leaned closer, waiting for the past to arrive in the present. The owner tried to laugh it off, but the sound frayed at the edges. "Come on," he said, pitching the line toward the room. "He's an actor. You've seen the outtakes, right?" He swallowed. "It's all camera tricks." No one bought it. The grin wouldn't stay on his face. The bikers didn't move, but their stillness made the lie smaller. The gray-bearded rider tilted his head, not quite a nod. "You ever seen him fight for real?" The question wasn't a dare, it was a measurement. The owner started to say yes, then realized he'd only ever watched on a couch. He let the letter hang, its emptiness obvious. His eyes slid toward the booth as if looking there might lend him a spine. Chuck stepped away from the seat, not advancing, not retreating, just standing where the light from the window caught the edge of his jacket. He buttoned nothing, squared nothing, arranged nothing. The order was already there. His gaze found the owner and stayed, level and quiet. The room felt it first in the hands. Fingers eased off glasses, off napkins, off phones. Even the waitress lowered her shoulders. A young rider with a pale scar along his jaw cleared his throat. "He doesn't brag," he said, voice steady, carrying. "So I will." He took one step forward and faced the room, not the owner. I was 17. El Paso, summer felt like it was buzzing in the wires. I had a bad crowd and a worse temper. Outside a liquor store, two guys boxed me in, one with a chain. I pulled a knife I shouldn't have had. A few in the restaurant looked down. The little girl's mother cupped her ear gently, as if to spare it and still listen. The kid went on. "This truck pulls in. Door opens. He gets out. This man, no camera, no audience, just that face you all think you know. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for me. He said, 'You don't want what comes after this.' Not loud, just true." He touched his own chest with two fingers. It landed right here. I dropped the knife. He told the other two to go home, used the kind of voice that leaves people with no argument. Then he stood there until their taillights were gone. A clink from the kitchen, someone setting down a ladle, sounded like punctuation. The owner's throat bobbed. "He asked where I lived," the kid continued. "Didn't ask for the story." Drove me around the block. Talked about consequence like it was a place he'd been. Next morning, he took me to a gym. Paid the month up front and told the coach my name. Said he'd check back. A small, incredulous smile cut through the scar. He did. Couple times. Brought work gloves once. Said my hands were shaking because they were unused tools. The busboy, Ethan, stood straighter. The teenagers' phones drifted lower, recording but ashamed of it. A middle-aged man near the door murmured, "Dallas, too," to his wife, then shut his mouth as if he'd said too much. Threads of other unspoken stories flickered across faces. Gym basements, church parking lots. A stray bill slid under a register clip when the tip jar was too light. The owner tried to wedge himself back into the center. "Look, kid, nice speech, but everyone's got a story when cameras show up." The words sounded tinny even to him. He gestured vaguely at the patches. "You all act like you know him?" the gray-bearded rider finished. "We do." Silence took the room again, but now it had warmth. The cook leaned both elbows on the pass and let the bell rest against his forearm. The mother in the booth rubbed slow circles on her daughter's back. A man who'd laughed earlier raised his glass toward Chuck and then lowered it without drinking. Chuck hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. The young rider filled the space. "He didn't give me a speech about respect, mister. He handed me a broom, said, 'Sweep before you speak.' I thought he meant the floor. He meant my life." The owner's bravado bled away in tiny, visible increments. He kept searching the faces for someone to save him, and kept finding eyes that wouldn't. The plate he'd been gripping sat forgotten on a table, a smear of gravy drying on porcelain. "Anyway," the kid said, glancing once at Chuck like he was asking permission to finish. "Whatever you think is happening here, it isn't. He's not here to win. He never is. He's here to keep people from losing more than they can afford." He looked around the room. "That includes you." A startled laugh escaped the owner, a small, wrong sound. "Me?" The tall rider finally spoke again, voice like a gear settling into a notch. "He could have made you small. he said. He didn't. He looked at the owner's hands. You did that yourself. The line found the corners of the restaurant and settled there. The crowd changed shape. The teenagers lowered their phones fully, screens dimming. Ethan exhaled in a shudder he'd been holding for minutes. The waitress, who'd been ready to intervene a dozen times and hadn't, wiped a perfectly clean spot on the counter, just so her hands had something to do. A chair scraped. The older man in the ball cap stood again, not to grandstand, just to be counted differently this time. He can finish his meal, he said to the owner, and it wasn't a question. The owner looked like he'd been stripped down to plain lumber. No varnish, nothing to shine. He nodded once, small. Sure, he said. Then, because habits die loud, he added, I didn't mean, and couldn't find a finish that didn't make it worse. Chuck's gaze stayed on him, not hard, not soft, just accurate. He took one step closer. Not many. Enough that the distance could be crossed by a sentence. The room leaned with him, drawn by the possibility that he might finally speak. He did not raise his chin. He didn't square his shoulders. He just breathed, a slow, even pull that carried no heat. The owner flinched anyway, as if expecting judgment in a louder register. In the doorway, the wind ticked the bell once. Somewhere out on the highway, a horn moaned and faded. The restaurant existed in that suspended second, where consequence decides which way to fall. The kid with the scar lowered his eyes, as if giving the floor to the man who'd once handed him a broom. The gray-bearded rider folded his arms and waited. Ethan's fingers gripped the back of a chair like a man bracing for a landing. Chuck opened his mouth, and the room, every table, every screen, every breath, hung on the first quiet word that would decide what kind of night they would all remember. Chuck didn't wait long. His voice came quiet but steady, carrying without effort. You've got a business to run. I get that he paused just enough to let the owner breathe, then added, but a room takes its shape from the loudest man in it. The owner seized on the opening. Exactly. I was only. Chuck cut him with a small shake of his head. I didn't ask you for anything. I came to eat. They came to eat. His hand drifted slightly, indicating the families, the staff, the busboy frozen by the counter. No anger, no show, just the truth, clean and sharp. The owner laughed weakly. It was a joke, that's all. I was just... No, Chuck said. His tone was soft, but final. You were showing off. He let the silence underline it. Then, real strength isn't about making someone small. It's about standing up when they can't. The words settled like weight across the tables. The teenagers lowered their phones. The waitress's breath loosened, her hands finally steady. Ethan exhaled with a noise halfway to relief. The crowd shifted from spectators to participants in a lesson they hadn't expected. Scattered clapping began, hesitant. Then the older man in the ball cap clapped once, hard, and stood. The sound spread until the whole room was applauding. Not rowdy, not performative, but unanimous. The owner's voice was barely audible now. I'm sorry. Sir, his bravado had drained completely, leaving something small, unpolished. Chuck didn't gloat. He inclined his head slightly, then slid a folded bill under the edge of his check. Food was good, he told the waitress. She blinked fast, managed a grateful smile. On the house, the owner stammered, desperate. Chuck didn't even look at him. I pay for what I eat. He turned to Ethan. Saturday nights are overrated, he said, almost smiling. You learn more at lunch. Ethan nodded, color rushing back into his face. The gray-bearded biker tapped 2 fingers against the doorframe, and the angels shifted. No threats, no spectacle. They just began to file out, boots heavy, jackets creaking. On his way past, the tall rider paused. "Treat people right," he told the owner. "Pays better than tips." The bell jingled as the door closed. Engines coughed to life outside, filling the night with their steady rumble. The sound rolled through the glass like surf until it faded into distance. Inside, people exhaled. A woman hugged her daughter closer. The cook leaned on the pass, smiling faintly. The teenagers set their phones down, screens still glowing with clips they weren't sure whether to post. The owner lingered awkwardly by a table. "If there's anything I can—" "There is," Chuck said. "Start with your staff." His eyes flicked toward Ethan, then the waitress. That was all. "Yes, sir," the owner managed. Chuck slipped his jacket tighter, palmed his keys, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, the young biker with the scar reached out his hand. Chuck shook it firmly. Wordless, the kid's eyes shone with something that wasn't awe so much as gratitude. Chuck stepped outside. The angels parted around him without choreography, just instinct. He climbed into a truck as ordinary as his manner and closed the door with a flat, final sound. Tail lights glowed red, then vanished toward the highway. Back inside, the restaurant filled with the murmur of people returning to themselves. The waitress refilled coffee no one had ordered. Ethan stacked menus with a steadier grip. The older man in the cap lifted his glass in a small, private toast. Phones lit up again. Videos went online, captions raw and rushed. "We saw it happen," he said it himself. Not a movie. Real life. Within minutes, likes and comments began to pile in. But the people who had been there knew no headline could carry the truth. They would remember the silence, the broom story, the apology that shrank a bully, and the single line that held more force than any kick ever could. Real strength isn't about making someone small. It's about standing up when they can't. The neon sign outside buzzed and steadied. A fork scraped a plate. Someone laughed softly. And just like that, the night moved on, leaving behind a story already bigger than the room that had birthed it.